Hey, Dr. C here with you. So what are the 13 most dangerous foods for those with Hashimoto's? This is an important topic, and I'm eager to go through this with you. So for starters, let's think through which foods are not a good fit for you personally. Now, that's something that no one else can know for sure. Uh, you may have found that some foods just cause bad digestion. Some might give you rashes. Some you might even be anaphylactically reactive to, like in the case of peanut allergies. People can have things like celiac disease where they cannot tolerate gluten. So the first question is, what do you need? What do you do well with? What do you need to avoid? And that really can't be ignored. I would push back a little bit because there are times to where, I don't know, we're led to think that we do badly with things that maybe we could do okay with. And sometimes people cut a lot of foods out and it ends up making them more intolerant of foods. You know, if you eat too few foods, your gut can change in ways to make it to where you can't eat a lot of foods. So sometimes those things you're not stuck with. So just put a pin in that and consider that part of it. The next thing to think through is just, healthy food. No one does well with processed foods. And this is not thyroid specific. Probably the easiest way to think about that is based upon how processed a food is, how highly processed it is. And the easiest way to know about that is just about its ingredient list. The first question is, does it have one? The very best foods to base your diet off of don't have ingredient lists. You can do really well on fresh poultry, meat, seafood, whole grains, nuts and seeds, beans, legumes, vegetables, fruits. Those are the things to really build the diet out of. None of those foods have ingredient lists. The foods that have lengthy ingredient lists, even more than a couple ingredients, they're processed to varying degrees. And the evidence is strong that processed foods, they don't really fill us up. We eat more than we need from them, and they have many health issues. They're generally so dense in fuel that they cause us to develop metabolic problems. We gain weight, we get high blood sugar, we get higher cholesterol. So you want to be on a minimally processed diet. That is true for everyone. That's true for all of us. So you want to talk about food, you want to talk about the right amounts. So let's start getting thyroid specific. Well, here's where it gets important. How do you decide which thyroid unfriendly foods are worth avoiding and which ones are not? One approach I've heard people say is that they want to be sure they're doing everything they can. And they've seen conflicting advice out there. They've seen some people say that this food is bad and that one is bad. And they want to be cautious. They want to cut all of it out. They want to cut out any possible food that's hard on their thyroid. I'm here to tell you, you can't do that. You cannot do that. So there's so many conflicting ideas, and any food you can think of, somebody somewhere says that it's bad for you. There's nothing that gets past every single gatekeeper. So you can't do that. Otherwise, you have no food left. I've seen people try to become vegan and paleo and AIP and keto all at the same time. And what they find is that they've painted themselves into a corner. There's nothing they can eat. And I'm not exaggerating. There's like no safe foods and no combinations. So you can't just throw the doors open and take all comers. You've got to think it through a little bit. And the question is, one big group of ideas comes from ideas. It's like, well, we think this might be bad because of this, or this could hurt your thyroid because XYZ. So that's one thing. What's more meaningful, though, is what actually happens to humans. People are complicated. We think about things like weather or economics or whatnot. There's these complex systems where our body's a complex system. We can think about its various parts and its various chemical pathways and how food might interact with those parts and pathways. And from that, we can make guesses. And sometimes those guesses come out true, but they almost always do not. So things that are ideas or guesses, those things are great subjects to do studies on, to have human studies on. But before there's human studies, they're just guesses in the dark. And they're almost always wrong more often than they're right. So a lot of the things I mentioned about the ideas of various things that are bad or harmful, nightshades or oxalates or goitrogens, they're based on speculation. They're based on ideas. They're not based on real world studies of people today in the modern world and adults with thyroid disease. So when we narrow down to what do we know about foods and adults with thyroid disease and people in the real world? Well, the big things that come up then are going to be thoughts around gluten, thoughts around AIP, and thoughts around iodine. Briefly, there's clear evidence that many people with thyroid disease have celiac disease. And if they do, they're much better off avoiding wheat. Now, there's another subset of people that has avoided wheat and they feel better from that. They're not sure if they have celiac disease. The problem is that when they're avoiding wheat, there's no accurate test for celiac disease. I talked to someone just a few days ago, and she said that she had negative tests for celiac. She was tested for it and found to be negative. And I said, well, so first she said she didn't have celiac, but she felt better without wheat. I said, oh, okay, so tell me why you don't have celiac. Well, I was tested. The doctor said I don't have it. I'm like, okay, so were you avoiding wheat before that test was done? Well, yeah, I hadn't eaten wheat for years by then. I'm like, well, that test means nothing. So you can't know. But however, that doesn't mean she should eat wheat. She knows she does better without it. So if you know you do better without it, avoid it. That's fine. But if you don't see a difference, there's no evidence saying you're healthier avoiding it. Odd thing, but even those with celiac disease, their wheat intake doesn't correlate with their thyroid health. They should avoid wheat, but if they don't, their thyroid is no worse for it. So that one's really a non-issue. Next is AIP. This is a cluster of a whole bunch of different ideas about lectins and phytates and oxalates and nightshades, like any possible thing that someone might think is bad. It says just cut it all out. Well, it's been studied. There was a large human study done. A group of women with thyroid disease went on an AIP diet. One group did not. They were tracked for a period of 10 weeks. Their thyroid markers, their thyroid antibodies were measured very closely. There was no change whatsoever. So it didn't affect their thyroid function. There are those that feel better from it. There's those that find it's been useful. That's totally fine. But if someone says, hey, is there strong evidence saying this would help me? There's not. And there is evidence saying that it did not help. So it's not something I would suggest to pursue otherwise. So the other thing we think about in the diet is the iodine status, the overall levels of iodine in foods. And in terms of the amount of human studies, I just looked at this up a few minutes ago. So currently there's over 33,000 studies relating iodine to thyroid function. And there's over 1,600 studies on the effects of dietary iodine on thyroid function. We know about this stuff. There's massive evidence on this stuff. And it's kind of a weird story, but your thyroid needs iodine. But for many people, they don't tolerate a little bit extra. And a little bit extra can be the biggest driver of thyroid disease in the modern world. And the other facet of this is it's not just, well, that's why it happened. It's also like, hey, this might be a solution. Because for many people that did develop thyroid disease, regulating and reducing iodine can often reverse it. And often reverse it means like 80% of the time. And for those that it doesn't reverse it, it almost always improves it. That's about 97% of the time. So in terms of things in your diet that are going to hurt your thyroid, really, human evidence really revolves around iodine and the relevance of it. So considering that, what are the 13 biggest offenders that you want to avoid to keep your thyroid healthier? Well, so I thought about how to make this list. And the first one's going to be kelp granules. Now, if I wanted to just make a list of 13 items that were highest in iodine, they would all be seaweed. Seaweed, sea vegetables, call them what you like. They're massively high in iodine. The sea itself contains a fair amount of iodine, and sea vegetables concentrate it and they bioaccumulate it. They concentrate a lot of other stuff from the sea too. Not all of it is good. So radioactive iodine builds up in sea vegetables. That's been a big concern since Fukushima. We also see things like lead and mercury and arsenic concentrate in sea vegetables. They do have some good minerals, but when you get down to the brass tacks and you count the numbers, like milligrams per serving, they're not really exceptional. You can do much better with just simple stuff like broccoli and spinach. They're much richer in the same minerals. So you really lose nothing by avoiding them, but they are ridiculously high in iodine. So take kelp granules. Most food charts will talk about 100 grams as a standard serving size. It's about 3 ounces. Now that's more than we would consume for some things. It's less than we would consume for others. But most of these units I'll talk about will come from standard serving sizes. So kelp granules, and kelp can be eaten as an actual food, like seaweed salads or nori for sushi wraps or dulse as a snack. We're talking about 81,000 micrograms of iodine per serving. So what does 81,000 mean? How is that relevant to your intake? So your targets, if you want to keep your thyroid healthy, and say your thyroid is working fine, you've got no problems, you want to keep it there. Or say you are on treatment, but you want to just maintain status quo. Well, that target's about 50 to 200 micrograms. And that is from diet, but it's from all your sources. So it can also come from medications, from supplements, from cosmetics, but that sum total you want to be like 50 to 200 micrograms. Now, let's say your thyroid is a project. Let's say you want it to do better in some way. Then your new target is somewhere less than 100 micrograms. And yeah, kelp can be 81,000 micrograms per serving. So let me see if I can do the math quickly enough. So 5 times 8. So that's 400. Is that 400 or 4,000? Get my zeros right. So 400. Yeah, that's over a year's worth of iodine and not even if you're trying to actually get your thyroid better, now we're talking about over, just about 3 years worth of iodine is all in that one serving of kelp. So not kidding, 3 years in a serving. No, you want it spread out much more than that. The number two source, this is a weird one, sherbet. And I guess sherbet is the correct pronunciation. I always heard sherbet when I was little. That's how I said it and heard it being said. So this is like a common frozen dessert, but it's a classic example of how processed foods can have ridiculous, unexpected amounts of iodine. Several assays have shown that it can have 1,480 micrograms of iodine per serving. Why is that? Well, we see a lot in hard candies also. Candies can have like 680 micrograms of iodine per serving. And the upshot is that iodine is used in a lot of ways in food production. And that can be a matter of color enhancers, texturizers, stabilizers, emulsifiers, antioxidants. It does a lot of useful stuff, but it's just hard on the body while it does that. And here's the weird part. There's nothing on the ingredient list that would clue you off. We'll talk next about bread, and this is a clear case in point for that. So I'll talk about 4 and 5, then come back to this thing about labels and food labels. So number 4 and 5 would be bread, white bread and wheat bread, 500 to 600 micrograms per serving. And there was actually a study done in which they looked at breads bought from commercial stores and categorized them by whether or not they listed iodized dough conditioners. So some breads say they're made with iodized dough conditioners. And you'd think that those are the ones that were high in iodine and the other ones wouldn't have much iodine. But it just ain't so. It just isn't what we would expect. So the researchers who purchased the breads and categorized them then analyzed their iodine content. And what they found is that it's a mystery why bread has so much iodine. The labels don't tell you. And that's true for sherbet, for candy, for other processed foods. There's not really one thing you could pick out on a long ingredient list that would make you think, that might have a bunch of iodine. There's no safe thing you can say, but there's none of that there, so therefore it won't have iodine in it. It doesn't exist. There's nothing like that. You can easily rule that out. And this is one more reason why you want to get way down on the food processing scale. You want to get to the things that are minimally processed. So after bread, we think about some types of seafood. Cod and haddock as a couple of examples. We can see 200-300 micrograms per serving. Now, this one's a bummer because overall, seafood is a net positive. No one's going to wreck their health by avoiding hard candy. But you need some seafood in your diet. It really is a good thing overall. So in the Thyroid Reset diet, I worked hard to find some low iodine seafood options. And they do exist. Trout is one of the best ones. Shrimp is generally good, as are scallops. So there are some good things out there. There's many more that I talk about in the book. But yeah, seafood can be high, so it takes some deliberate thought. Next up would be eggs. Now, eggs are overall also good foods. They're nutritionally dense. The one thing is that the iodine is completely restrained to the yolks. So there's no iodine in egg whites. And in terms of recipes, almost any place that you would use whole eggs, you can use egg whites and do okay. Now, eggs have rather predictable amounts. They're not amounts that are radically higher from one type to the other. The good thing about that is when you're out of that reset phase, out of that below 100 microgram target, and your thyroid's stable again, you can work eggs into that 50 to 200 microgram per day range. That's doable. You can do an egg yolk or two per day as a yellow light food option. Next up, we've got dairy. So dairy is going to take several slots. We got skim milk, yogurt, Swiss cheese, cottage cheese, numbers 9 through 12. And this is the deal. Dairy is one of the biggest sources. And the two sources that have changed the most in the last few decades are processed grains and dairy. The other sources have always been there. They've been like this basal amount of iodine in the diet. But in the last few decades, dairy and processed grains have just skyrocketed, and they've caused the net amount to go up. And it's no coincidence that it correlates with the uptick of thyroid disease and thyroid cancer. These things all go hand in hand. Now, dairy foods could have a place in a diet. Same thing, when one is back to a maintenance range, they could be considered as a yellow light option. But during that reset phase, you're better off on plant-based dairy substitutes. So things like flax milk or rice milk or non-dairy cheeses, and those can work out just fine. No drawbacks with those. And winding down the list, number 13 and beyond, then we're looking at processed meats. And here's the thing to where there's really no net health benefit. They also do raise risks for stomach and colorectal cancers and also for cardiovascular disease, but they can be sources of a lot of hidden iodine. So no big loss by ditching them. But the good news is that by being aware of foods like this, you can do a good job helping your thyroid heal. And the follow-up question is, well, if these are the worst foods, what are the thyroid-friendly foods? And that's easy. It's everything else. Besides those types of things, every food category has tons of options that are safe and good for your thyroid within the unprocessed foods. Grab the Thyroid Reset Diet. I've delineated all your good options and put them into recipes and made meal plans and shopping lists and all of that. So you've got tons of options. Your thyroid can get better, and you don't really have to be in a minefield. You've got many foods to choose from, and there's nothing that's horribly restrictive. All right, take great care. We'll talk again really soon. Bye-bye.